my name's Erin Whelchel, and I'm the Outreach Manager at GWATFL, where I run our Lead with Languages public awareness and advocacy campaign. Today, I'll be sharing with you some information about the Seal of Biliteracy. Now, you may have an existing SEAL pathway at your school or in your district that you're looking to build upon, or perhaps you've heard some of the wonderful news stories around the country about students who are earning this recognition and you'd like to learn more. We're going to do a very brief overview about what the SEAL is and the progress that it's made, and then take a closer look at the updated guidelines for implementation that were released in 2020, particularly where we're looking at public and non-public educational entities. So I'll pull up some slides here and we'll get started. Okay, so our first question is, what is the SEAL? And as you may know, the Seal of Biliteracy is an award granted by a school district, or state in recognition of students who have attained proficiency in 2 or more languages. This is typically English and another world language or languages. The seal can be issued in a variety of school settings. It is not limited to public schools, nor is it limited to languages that are formally taught in the school district. It is applicable to all human languages. Physically, the seal also takes a variety of shapes and sizes. It can be an emblem on a high school diploma or a transcript. It can also take a physical form like a medal or a certificate. And the seal's overall purpose is to encourage lifelong learning. So while we talk about seal programs, it's not so much a program per se, as we're really talking about a movement that's generating national interest in proficiency-driven curricula, but that's also giving students the agency to really determine where they are, to think about their proficiency as something that is on a scale, determine where they are in that, and then help to really build that pathway for themselves and be really engaged in that process. So we're empowering students to think about their proficiency, not as something that's an end game, but that's something that they will meet certain criteria to earn this seal, and that will continue throughout the rest of their education and the rest of their lives. So when we look at the origins of the seal, this starts in 2008, when Californians Together launches a movement to recognize California K-12 English learners. This is the origin of the Seal of Biliteracy. In 2011, then California Congresswoman Julia Brownley writes the legislation to create the California State Seal of Biliteracy. And so this is the moment when the seal first becomes law. In spring of 2012, 10,000 California high school graduates received the seal. Then in 2013, U.S. Representative Brownley introduces to Congress the BEST Act, the Biliteracy Education, Seal, and Teaching Act. And this proposes renewable funding for states to either establish or to expand upon an existing SEAL program. In July of 2020, the BEST Act is passed by the U.S. House of Representatives as part of the NDAA. And while this did not go through to the conference version, and so it was not written into law, this remains a really important movement, especially for language advocates. This brought national attention to the seal, and it placed it at a really favorable position to be considered in future legislation. And of course, the exciting news this year was that in March of 2021, the BEST Act was reintroduced in both the House and Senate. In the meanwhile, in 2020, in October, 7 organizations, including GWATFL, co-authored updated guidelines for implementation of the seal. This is important because the initial guidelines were from 2015, and as this has really expanded and grown to reach so many states, there's a definite focus in these updated guidelines on equity and access to make sure that as it is implemented nationwide, all students, regardless of their heritage language, the setting in which they're learning the language, wherever they're coming to this from, whatever part of that pathway, they all have the same opportunity to earn the seal and to really demonstrate their proficiency. So this is the map from the Seal of Biliteracy website, sealofbiliteracy.org. And it's wonderful on the site. You can click on it. It's interactive, so you can pull up the criteria for your state and see what status your state is for where they're at in implementing the seal. What's really exciting is that for the first time, we see no grayed out states here So everyone either has an approved SEAL pathway or is in the planning stages for. And the other lovely thing is that we are now at 41 states with an approved SEAL program, plus the District of Columbia. So there are 42 approved state SEAL programs currently in progress. The SEAL also released some data at the end of last year that just gives us a wealth of information, and it sort of acts as a snapshot of where the SEAL is right now in this moment of progress. So we see students, an increased number of students who earned the SEAL in 2019. We see SEALs earned in 119 languages in addition to English, averaging about 20 languages per state, but we see some states like Washington that got up as high as 69 languages. And we also see students demonstrating proficiency in more than just English and a world language, but English and 2 or 3 or more world languages. And we know that these are not all languages they're learning formally in a district setting, in a school setting. These are languages they're bringing from their home, their families, and that are being recognized, and students are able to take that and move forward in other aspects of their education. So really exciting data. Also, this is taken from that report. We see there were 33 states who participated, 31 states who participated in this report. And out of those, 97% are giving SEALs in Spanish. We see the other languages here. 50% of the states participating in this report granted SEALs in ASL or Hindi. But then as you look down through the other data provided, we see a really great diversity of languages where 47% of states are awarding SEALs in Tagalog, 40% in Portuguese, 30% in Polish and Turkish, 23% in Amharic. And so some of these less commonly taught languages are really being recognized throughout the country in numbers higher than we may have anticipated. So that's great news. I'd like to talk briefly about proficiency levels and where states are as far as those criteria that are set to meet. Most states, and this is from the report, 57%, require students to reach the intermediate mid-range, and then 32% of states are requiring the intermediate high level. What's really important in this is that when we think of that intermediate mid, intermediate high range, and we're kind of where the green is meeting the orange in our cone here, we know that this takes an average student, and there's going to be students on both sides of that spectrum, about 4 years to reach, 4 years of formal studying. And so the earlier that we put students into this pathway and we provide that opportunity to either provide a formal class and or other ways to nourish their language maintenance and experience and development, whether that's a heritage language or it's coming from a less formal school setting or educational setting, they have a better chance if they're exposed earlier on to these opportunities to achieve the SEAL by the end of their high school career than they would if they were entering a language class for the first time, for example, the freshman year of high school, where they only have those 4 years before their graduation to earn the SEAL. So this really emphasizes the importance of considering a SEAL program as something that's a district-wide effort. The actual granting of the SEAL may happen in high school, but it's something that begins at the earliest stages when students are entering that district and continues actually beyond their high school career as they go into maybe a post-secondary experience or work experience. So while we're thinking about that, we're talking about empowering students. They have the agency where they're developing this pathway for themselves. They're thinking about their proficiency. They're using the can-do statements to figure out ways that they can actually practice certain skills to build that proficiency level. We're also really empowering districts and even higher ed institutions when we promote and we really support these SEAL programs. We're focusing, developing proficiency-driven curriculum. We're demonstrating practical, authentic uses of the languages, and also coursework that's got an eye toward career readiness. We're looking at interdisciplinary collaborative courses and experiences, and that really smooth vertical articulation from the earliest grades all the way through passing when the student receives the SEAL, earns the SEAL, and onto their post-secondary studies. And so really, because the students' expectations of their education and their language learning experience is changing throughout this process, as more students have that same experience as they're working towards a seal, it's also changing, has implications for that post-secondary experience, because now they're arriving on college campuses with different expectations of what that language course needs to provide for them and the different opportunities that they'll be able to use those skills in a real world setting. So it's really something that's happening at all levels of a student's education and that we can all get involved in. So these are the new updated guidelines I mentioned that came out in 2020. And so the main goals for this are listed here. What they're really looking at is a focus on equity and inclusion, accessibility, that whether a student is coming to this, learning world language, or whether they're an English learner, they're going to have different levels in both languages throughout the different modes. And so it's how do we support students no matter what part of that pathway they're coming in, so that they all have those same opportunities moving forward. And as this has grown now to 42 approved programs and other ones that are being worked on by states and are in progress, we really need to focus making sure that this is something that's equal for everybody. So there are 6 main guiding themes that the new guidelines address. And we'll go through the first few, and then we'll spend a little bit more time on numbers 5 and 6. But of course, advocacy is a really key component of this. And so we do have a blog post on the Lead with Languages site that talks a little bit more specifically about how you can advocate for SEAL programs, starting at the local level and moving on from there. But it's creating awareness, it's doing some of that myth busting, it's really learning about the guidelines and seeing what you can do to help promote them, and that your students can do. And that leads into the second goal here, which is pathways to biliteracy. And this is that part where students have that agency to work with their school and their teachers to develop a plan from the early stages to a self-assessment with those can-do statements, seeing where they are now, what are the really practical, hands-on, authentic experiences that we can develop so the student has ways to really stretch and grow. The assessment that then determines that level that they're meeting the proficiency criteria, and then the actual granting of the seal and the celebration that follows. And of course, that celebration part where we're sharing the news about students receiving the seal is a big part of the advocacy portion of this as well. So the more awareness we can create, the more people we're including in that celebration. Equity and access is the third point. And of course, this is something that's prevalent throughout all pieces of the guidelines. But here we're really looking at making sure that no matter what language the student is learning or what setting that was, whether it was homeschool or somehow a different setting, that they're given that same opportunity to demonstrate their proficiency. And so we're looking at GWATFL assessments. Other assessments can be used. Some states have portfolio assessments. And so if a test does not exist in the language the student is learning, they can create a portfolio project that will also demonstrate. And there are other modes of assessment, just making sure that it's working for all students. We also have the state education agencies that are involved. And here, this is about tracking data on a state level, tracking that progress, tracking those pathways. It's also about the smooth coordination between the schools and districts that are working on the K-12 level to make this happen, and then post-secondary institutions within the state, so that there's really the smooth transition when a seal appears on a high school transcript. Folks at the post-secondary level know what that means and that they're able to, across state lines, recognize that achievement of the student. And this brings us to points 5 and 6, where we'll focus some time on, whether you are in a public school district or in a non-public entity. Either way, you are able to grant a seal of biliteracy. So we'll look at some of the ways that this is possible. Oops. In a public school district, there are some things we can keep in mind as we're building these programs. One is that the district can develop tools to capture linguistic diversity of all the students, beyond just the population of English language learners or just the students who are enrolled in a world language, target language course. It's really about capturing what those students are bringing from the broader community and then building partnerships with families to really strengthen that. So tools like this could be a home language survey to see what are those languages that are there and how can we better support them. And in addition to reaching out to families, it's important for schools and districts to reach out to the local business community, not only to identify some potential funding for these programs to help support them, but also to create those links so that as these students are graduating and entering that community and looking for jobs, that those businesses are aware of this resource that's going to be available to them. And so some of those connections are already being formed. Some other things we can do are of course, are establish informal and extracurricular language learning opportunities so that students are able to interview someone using their language, do some research using their language, use all of the different modes so that they have these real world experiences. And this has to be in addition to and beyond regular courses so that we have a wealth of opportunities available in those practice moments, because that's really where a lot of that growth is going to happen. And of course, then we also want the district to prioritize the retention, recruitment, and professional development of educators across disciplines who also have these multilingual skills and are really able to help build that environment in the district where this program and pathway is going to thrive. And as you remember, the seal can take a whole bunch of different shapes. So this can be on a diploma, as a certificate or medal. It's really important to think about including the seal on transcripts if possible, because that's the document when we're talking about the seal as evidence of reaching a certain level of proficiency. That transcript is the document that an admissions officer is going to be reviewing, a scholarship committee, potential future employer. And so if we're able to get the seal on that document, that's going to be something the student carries with them into the near future and opportunities that they're looking for. For non-public entities, and here we're talking about formal schools such as an independent, private, or parochial school, and also informal school educational settings like a community-based school or weekend school. In some states, these entities are actually able to grant a seal of biliteracy or even grant a high school diploma. In other states, the guidelines state that only public schools are able to issue a state seal of biliteracy, but this does not prevent non-public entities from issuing a seal that demonstrates the same level of proficiency, because a seal in the end is a symbol of recognition of achieving a certain level of criteria. And so what the non-public entities may do is simply follow the same process determined by the state for the state seal of biliteracy and create a certificate or other document that is their own seal of biliteracy that follows the same criteria and lays out what languages and what levels of proficiency the student has achieved. In this way, they're following the same, they're aligned with the same requirements of the state, and it is a seal of biliteracy that student is able then to show for different opportunities moving forward and knows that they've achieved that level of achievement. I've included some references here for you. You can download the guidelines and take a closer look, as well as that Lead with Languages blog post where we talk some more about advocacy. And again, I thank you. My name is Erin Whelchel. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you have students in your school or district who have achieved the seal or are working toward it, I would love to feature some of those stories on the Lead with Languages blog. So please don't hesitate to reach out about that either. Thanks so much.